I think I would like to open up the floor to ask a question. I would ask that you keep the question short, because we don't have a lot of time, and to address it to a particular panelist up here on the stage. There's a question right here.
Well, I'm Jory Hecht. I'm a PhD student at Tufts University in the Environmental Engineering and Water Diplomacy program, and my question is for John Briscoe, but if anybody else would like to answer it too, that would be possible. I'm wondering, in this large debate about storage and its need, especially in developing countries, I'm wondering, to what extent have off-stream reservoirs been discussed as a potential water supply solution? I mean, they are somewhat difficult to use in very large populations, but large cities in the United States have begun using them, and I'm wondering, given that they have a lot of sustainability advantages, namely that they don't trap sediment, minimal sediment trapping, they don't really block fish passage much. I'm wondering to what extent they've been discussed as a potential solution in developing countries.
Yeah, as you probably know, off-stream storage is how much of the British water system has worked for several hundred years. So have they been looked at? Absolutely, they've been looked at. I'm engaged, for example, in Pakistan now. This is a massive issue because you have floods. Can you redirect floods? Can you do groundwater recharge, do off-stream storage? So yes, they absolutely are a part of the solution. Again, everything is location specific, needs to be looked at in its context, rather than a small is good, big is bad, off is good, on is bad. Each thing has its place, and I think what your question implies is you need to have a full set of the alternatives, their pros and cons when you look at this. My perception is this is well done. I would just like to come back on one question, and I think Suresh asked Martin on this. I think there's a very interesting issue. Martin and I I'm glad Martin's still speaking to me. Every now and then he says he'll never speak to me again. But the issue with NGOs like the WWF, I think there's a very interesting difference. Gabrielle and I worked in Brazil. Brazil has a World Wildlife Fund that's autonomous, run by Brazilians about Brazil. It does an absolutely fantastic job, because the people who live in Brazil have to live with the consequences, cannot take you shouldn't do this and you shouldn't do that, and they're very productive. I am extremely suspicious of WWF globally. Martin and I have talked. I said I would love to see, Martin, when you say dams are okay, that you've taken down your big headline that was published in the FT and the Economist, that dams, the tombstone, Hoover Dam is the tombstone of the world. Martin says, no, that's not ours, but they never take it down. My point on governance on this is, if you were doing it, look for a good NGO where people have to live in India and live with the consequences. Don't ask GTZ to fund it. Don't ask the Germans to come in and do it. Find people who have to live with the consequences. And that, I think, is a great success story, because the countries like a Brazil, like an India, are developing their own capability of doing that doesn't have the moral hazard of people sitting a long way away and telling people how to do that. So sorry for that.
No, that's
little
brilliant.
piece of
Thank
it.
you.
Okay.
Are there any other questions? Yes, sir?
My name is Frank Muramuzi. I'm from Uganda. And I would have asked the question to the minister, but she has just left. But nevertheless, I will ask Kate, the World Bank, and she knows it. You have been talking about big dams for water and energy, and you have also been saying that you don't think the small infrastructure, the small dams could provide energy and water. Has anybody, World Bank or any other, assessed how much it takes to put up a big structure, a big dam versus a small dam, water harvesting, in terms of money? For example, if you were to invest like $1 billion in water harvesting, rainwater harvesting, and you have to invest $1 billion to put up a dam, and which one would be better to provide water or energy to the communities we have experiences in Uganda? We have invested all that money. We have built dams for energy. And we have invested a lot of money, sponsored by the World Bank. And we have never got that electricity. And Kate knows it. They own for the extension. It is a failed project, supposed to produce 200 megawatts. And it produces now about 50. The Bujagari project was supposed to produce 250 megawatts. Now recently, the government said it is supposed to produce 50 megawatts, but even they never switched it onto the main grid. That is one. Two, we also the World Bank sponsor through IFAD. They sponsored to build the dams in Karamoja and other places in Uganda. And up to now, there is no dam that is providing water. If that money was put in small infrastructures, wouldn't we, the communities, be happy?
Thank you.
So to me, I think that is a genuine question.
I think that's a very good question.
So I can't, hello Frank, I can't answer for Maria, but I will just say, just to clarify, I have not said that we only will build large dams. What I've said is that we encourage and we are heavily invested in micro, mini, all size of hydro power generation. We are also invested in all kinds of infrastructure for water storage, small, medium and large. And it depends on location-specific, country-specific needs and desires. And so, but what I'm saying is that we are not ruling out large water infrastructure for storage, for multi-use, for including generation of hydroelectricity. So that's what I've said. We will be involved in any and all of that as part of integrated solutions for food security, for energy security, and for water security. Now, on the specifics of Bujagali and others, I'm happy to take it offline. But we'll talk.
But that is one of, I mean, fundamentally, I think that is one of the questions. And maybe Jean can come in here because you've spent your lifetime studying, impact assessments, etc. I mean, it is a question. If you had invested that money in the smaller scale water harvesting versus the large dam, I mean, the fact is there isn't that kind of study available, is there?
But it's a false dichotomy. It's a false dichotomy. You do both. I mean, depending on the circumstances. Whether it depends on the conditions. Large dams are for different types of purposes. It's for you can't produce a lot of hydroelectric energy with the small projects. So, but the large projects provide a full range of services, including flood control, drought mitigation, navigation, maintenance of the waterways. I mean, it's different scales.
So it's a question of getting more bang for your buck. You're saying you get more bang for your buck with the big one. But again, there have been some critics who said it's sort of a knee-jerk reaction to think, oh, we must have a large dam because it brings us electricity and it controls floods and it does all sorts of things. Whereas perhaps, from what I understand, maybe those alternative needs can be met in a different way.
Well, just to be clear, alternatives analysis do happen and they take place, and there's nothing knee-jerk about building large infrastructure because it takes years. It takes years of analysis, years of planning and permitting, and then years of construction. So we do I mean, I think the point is with large water infrastructure is are we at the conceptual stage looking at all of the alternatives from a full water spectrum and from a full energy spectrum? And I think that's perhaps, as we've learned over time, not just us but everybody involved in the business, is that you need to make sure that your alternatives are looking at the full spectrum of all water needs and all energy needs.
Okay. All right. I'll take one more question from the floor, and then I think we're getting pretty close to where they might kick us out of the room. Are there any other questions? There's one question.
Hello, Sabine Cognetti, master student at La Sorbonne Paris. I wanted to ask a question for the World Bank. Cost-benefit analysis is the main analysis that we're using to see if a project would be good or not, if you're going to invest in it or not. It's a really subjective analysis, especially in the environment and social cost bit. And international impact are not always in those analyses. And how do you want to go further? Because if you're always going to use those analyses, corruption is going to get in, because obviously, if you want a very nice analysis, you can lower the cost and no one is going to say anything. So you have a lot of research going on and all that with other tools that you're going to use and you're going to be able to use than cost-benefit analysis. And I wondered if you were going on this way or not. Thank you.
So the prevailing governance situation of a given country or a given region is a very important determinant of whether we would even engage in a large infrastructure project or not. And there are countries in the world where we're just simply not able, despite pressing development needs and pressing poverty statistics, where we're just not able to engage in those kinds of projects because we can't guarantee the levels of transparency and the levels of governance necessary, not for us to get out without trouble, but in order to guarantee development impact, which is what we're about at the end of the day. So that's the first order of analysis. Once we're prepared to engage in a country, then yes, at the program and project level, we undertake all kinds of analysis. But built into that cost-benefit analysis is increasing sensitivity to, if there's an energy component to it, to all of the alternatives around GHGs and where we even sort of starting to do shadow carbon accounting to really understand, whether or not over time this is a smart investment from a climate perspective. And increasingly, we are now looking at and pushing very hard for countries to really use alternative natural capital accounts alongside the GDP, and so that they have a different data set in front of them to make sure that they're making the right kinds of decisions. So there's all kinds of factors that go into our alternatives analysis, the cost-benefit analysis, the economic returns, the social returns, environmental returns, and eventually financial returns to a project. So, I'd be happy to talk about that in more detail, but it's a very, very integrative view of whether or not a project makes sense for a country and whether or not we make sense as a financier.